Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. Not only do we bring you the best guests in true crime and an even better community, but we are punctual about it as well, starting right at the top of the hour as promised. Today, we dive back into the Dan Markel murder case with a couple of oldies but goodies. Members are friends, I should say, of Surviving the Survivor, who I'm about to introduce, and a new face. And by oldies and goodies, I mean people who've been on the show repeatedly, not in age, of course. The Dan Markel murder case, for those who have not been following it and living under a rock somewhere, he is the Harvard-educated FSU Law Professor, gunned down in his Tallahassee driveway back in 2014. Two hitmen and a go-between, a woman known as Katie Magbanawa, already convicted of the crime, sitting in prison. Well, Katie is in a jail in Leon County right now. She may testify in this case, which we'll talk about. Ex-brother-in-law, Charlie Adelson, whose trial began yesterday. He is the man accused of putting the hit on his ex-brother-in-law, Dan Markel. Jury selection continues into day 2 today, and that is why you see our first best guest here, Richard Gabriel. Since 1985, Richard Gabriel has been a leader in the field of jury research, jury selection, and litigation communication, with experience in more than 1,500 trials in both the civil and criminal arenas across the country. Some of his big cases include, listen to these names, Aaron Hernandez, Casey Anthony, O.J. Simpson, Phil Spector, Enron, remember that company? Whitewater, Kwame Kilpatrick, the former mayor of Detroit, Heidi Fleiss, and numerous other high-profile civil and criminal matters. Richard is also the author of Acquittal. An insider reveals the stories and strategies behind today's most infamous verdicts about his high-profile trial work. That was actually optioned by Warner Brothers and developed by CBS by a little guy known as Jerry Bruckheimer. And Richard is also the co-author of Jury Selection, Strategy, and Science. The woman behind the avatar. That is the mysterious fancy fiction, in my opinion, one of the most intriguing people surrounding the ongoing Dan Markel / Charlie Adelson case. She remains anonymous, hosting a YouTube channel with the same name, Fancy Fiction, where she's painstakingly posted important videos highlighting pertinent wiretaps related to the players, some implicated, others not, in the Dan Markel saga. Last but certainly not least, Judy Tsang. She's the founder and owner of the Wake Law Office, born in Chicago and raised in Georgia. She completed her undergraduate studies at the University of California, Berkeley, not too shabby a school, and received her law degree from the Georgetown University Law Center, not too shabby a school, and she hosts Asian American Legal Focus on YouTube. Welcome to one and all. A couple of quick notes. If you can, please support us on Patreon. If you can, please support us on YouTube. If you can't do either of those, one of the most important things for us is please give us a 5-star review on whatever audio platform you listen to us on. That would include Apple, Spotify, all the biggies, Audible, etc., etc. Also, our friend Ruth Markel, the mother of Dan Markel, she's actually going to be hosting an event in Tallahassee. She is there now. It is at a synagogue called Shomrei Torah. It's on Kerry Forest Parkway. Shomrei Torah on Kerry Forest Parkway. It is tomorrow, Wednesday, October 25th at 7 p.m. Wednesday, October 25th at 7 p.m. Speaking of them, Ruth, Phil, Dan's father, and Shelly, Dan's sister, they have been in the courtroom. They're going to be watching the trial from inside, as they have done in the other 2 trials to date. And Ruth was just quoted in the Tallahassee Democrat, which is sort of the paper of record on this case. She just said to the paper today, "We hope that justice prevails. There's a tremendous loss, and each trial reactivates that, the grief that you have for a lost child. So this is a very intense time, but we're also grateful for how much support we are blessed with." Vance, I'm going to start with you and then get over to Richard and Judy. But what do you think Ruth, Bill, and Shelley are going through right now? The trial is underway, but we're in the jury selection process. But a couple of days from now, we're really going to be in the middle of it all. What do you think they are experiencing?
Well, I communicate with Ruth, so I have a pretty good understanding about her, not so much Phil and Shelley, but I know that she's extremely, extremely nervous. A lot's on the line. She's waited years to, grab justice, sort of step by step. And I know it's extremely painful for her, and she's just going to be sitting on pins and needles, hoping nothing goes wrong and that she gets justice for her son. And I think that's all she's focused on right now. And I do know that she said after this event, she's going to completely switching her mindset and going into trial mode. So she made that point that she's going to have to turn on a switch and be very brave and sit through all this mess.
And Richard, I mean, you can speak to this as well. I know you don't personally know Ruth, but how agonizing is it for the families involved at the start of a trial, knowing that, in this case, Charlie's future hangs in the balance, but also getting justice for Dan Markel is of, paramount importance to the Markels. So what is it like on both sides?
It's brutal. I mean, these cases, we think of them as evidentiary, procedural type of exercises where it's about evidence and the legal, but it's about people. It's about some of the most horrible things that they've experienced in their lives, which is the loss of a loved one or an accused or a person who's close to them being accused and possibly going away to prison for a long time. So it's gut-wrenching because they don't know what the outcome is. They know how they feel about it. But to watch them in the courtroom trying to contain themselves, trying to behave in a proper decorum while still dealing with that intense emotion is a pretty extraordinary experience.
Shout out to Henshi Held, coming to us from Jerusalem, where rockets were being fired on Tel Aviv today once again. So thinking of Henshi and Tali, of course, Tali Schechter, who's coming to us from Tel Aviv. Quick programming note, which I should have mentioned off the top. This is 2 for Tuesday. We're going to do another show, 9 p.m. tonight, on the Delphi murders. It's been just an epic collapse there. The defense has withdrawn, and we've got an amazing panel, including Brett Talley of the Prosecutors Podcast. They just won Podcast of the Year at CrimeCon. He's going to be here along with Susan Hendricks, who wrote the book Down the Hill, formerly of CNN, and Laura Ingle, who's reporting for News Nation, and she was just in Delphi last week, met an interesting man. She's going to tell us all about that. That is at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So, Judy, to you, Charlie Adelson wearing a suit in court today that sort of matches his complexion, the ashen gray complexion he is exposing these days. What do you think, just generally speaking, Judy, of the way he's been looking the last few times?
Well, he actually looks a little bit better with the suit on, so good for him, but he did a good job looking kind of pathetic when the jury consultant told him to stand up so people could look at him. So I sort of almost felt a little sorry for him.
Did you say that, Judy? I can't believe you said that.
Yeah, you can't. Well, of course, I feel much more sorrier for Dan and his family, but he did a good job looking pathetic.
To be fair, this is horrific all the way around. Obviously, the Adelsons, Bear, and Charlie in particular, about to, face the moment of truth, bearing a lot of responsibility according, to the indictment here. So we're going to see how it all plays out. Judy, one more legal question. I'm going to pivot to some of the jury issues with Richard after that. But there was a defense motion today for a change of venue. Judge Stephen Everett basically swiftly denied that Is that something that you were expecting? Is that SOP?
Yes. Yeah, I was definitely expecting that because I had previously interviewed Chuck Collins, who was Luis Rivera's attorney. So he said he filed a motion to change venue also, and that was very quickly denied.
So Richard, let's kind of break this down a little bit, but jury selection in this case, it's interesting. We had on Jeremy Mutz, a former Tallahassee prosecutor, and when he found out that 900 possible jurors were summoned, his jaw hit the table because, he's used to maybe 20 or 30 in a typical trial in Tallahassee. But our other guest last night was the main anchor for Court TV, Vinny Politan, a great guy, and he said that it is almost across the board a potential jury pool of that size for high-profile cases. Does this number of 900 surprise you in any way?
Not really. I mean, Vinny's great, and he's covered so many of these high-profile trials, and he knows that the challenge here, while you may not need 900 people, you have no idea how many people have been exposed to this. And you have to go through everybody because, first of all, there's a series of hardships that you have to do to find out who can even sit on a trial that length. And that can easily cut a jury pool in half. And then you have to deal with also the people who have then seen and heard a lot about the case and whether they can be fair. So that's why they're going through this painstaking, arduous process of calling the amount of jurors that they are, because they may need that much. I did want to point out one issue regarding the change of venue, which is a very interesting one as well, because in Florida, it's very difficult to get a change of venue. From what I understand, you have to basically show that it's impossible to get a fair jury in your particular venue. And so it's very hard. And even though when we were doing the Casey Anthony case, we made a motion for change of venue, actually the prosecution in that case agreed with us. And that's why they went to Tampa to pick the jury and then brought them back to Orlando. So it's not completely unheard of. Some gang cases are where that are taking place in Miami are moved. So transferring jurors is an option if the judge is so inclined. But I think in this case, the judge is probably going to say, no, we have enough jurors in Tallahassee to be able to pick a jury here.
Yeah, and that appears to be what Judge Stephen Everett did. Here's a quote from Tim Jansen, obviously one of our best guests, the famed Tallahassee defense attorney. He's recuperating at home from 5 cracked ribs, and hopefully the pain is less. Tim, I know you're watching, but this is a quote he gave to the Tallahassee Democrat today. In 2000, U.S. District Judge Robert Hinkle granted our change of venue motion in U.S. versus Larry Lombardi, the FAMU bombing case. That's how rare change of venue motions are granted, because he's talking about this being close to 24 years ago. So it is not a very frequent thing that occurs. Fancy, to you, there was just a comment asking, is court going to be busier once the actual, quote unquote trial gets underway? I've spoken to Katie Kool-Lady, who is a member of STS Nation, and she told me the court is basically empty. Does it surprise you, or is it just because we're in the beginning stages here trying to actually pick a jury? And do you expect it to be jam-packed once Steve Cohen and I get up there for STS next week?
Yeah, well, I think once the fanfare of you and Steve's arrival dies down, I think that there will be room. I had to silence a call from Kathy just now, who sort of was calling, and it's she also, I just want to do a quick plug for her, because her name is Katie Kool-Lady. She might chime in here to the chat. But what's really interesting about her is that she's a trained psychiatric nurse. So if she looks for things and she documents them, and has years of doing that. She's retired now. She has cleared her schedule and driven from Pennsylvania to Tallahassee with the sole purpose. She's not going to be doing legal stuff. She's not going to be giving commentary, making jokes. She's specifically going to be watching the jury. She has sat through a couple trials as a victim. Her own sister was murdered, and it was kind of a high-profile case, and she's been on TV shows talking about it. So she has experience of a victim, of a nurse, and then She actually went and sat in on the Jodi Arias trial every day, as well as a Scott Peterson as a sort of a victim supporter, got very engaged with the family and even found some evidence and became on the witness list, I believe, for the Scott Peterson. So this is someone who's very seasoned, has the training, and is sitting there now watching the courtroom and all the jurors right now. So, she's been texting me all day, and I would really encourage people to go follow her because she's posting little updates of observations that she's seen in the jury. So I just want to point people there, and she will also be doing this during trial. But she also, going back now that that's all done, she says it's the largest courtroom she has ever been in Tallahassee. And she said that she is actually absolutely shocked at how you can just walk in, no security. They're not that fussy about things as compared to the media hype of the Scott Peterson and Jodi Arias trial. So I do think there will be room in the courtroom per Kathy. And yeah, again, once you and Steve leave, that should clear a lot of room for other people to come.
Fancy, don't underestimate the magnetic charm of Steve Cohen, otherwise known as Meave Moen, especially in person. That guy radiates. I will take photos next week when there are throngs of people surrounding Steve Cohen. He will, in fact, become a people magnet once he's in there. But it's funny because I called about 4 or 5 weeks ago. I called an email to get press credentials because I'm a neurotic former broadcast news guy, and incredibly laid back at the Leon County Courthouse. To your point, they were kind of wondering why I was even asking for press credentials. And they assured us it would be fine. And lo and behold, I got press credentials. So we're hoping to do a bunch of interviews when we are there. And look at this, Fancy, Katie Cool Lady on the chat. I'll be at Ruth's event tomorrow. Again, that is tomorrow night at a synagogue in Tallahassee called Shom Rei Torah. Just remember the word Torah, and it's on Kerry Forest Parkway for those who are listening to us from the Tallahassee area, and I know there's a bunch of you there. Look at this, Flower Goddess saying hello from my neck of the woods in Miami, and obviously there are strong Miami ties to this. Perhaps the whole reason we're here is because of Miami and Donna Adelson's desire to have her grandchildren close. Look at this. Murray Muncie says, woo-hoo, it is fancy fiction. Tennis Girl says, yay, Judy, got all the bases covered. Richard, to you. So let's just break down some of these juror numbers, these potential jurors. So 900 people, as we mentioned, were summoned to serve on the jury, which the judge says is going to have 12 members and 3 alternates. As many as 360 jurors were expected to report between Monday and Wednesday, or roughly 120 a day. We know now that 41 of them made it through on Monday, 41 prospective jurors, and another about 14 or so cleared that hurdle Tuesday morning. The court said it was hoping to get about 60 prospective jurors lined up for group jury selection, which was supposed to start this afternoon. Just walk us through these numbers. So 900 in total, broken down to 360 to report. 41 make it through yesterday. Anything of note with these numbers as you're hearing them?
Not really. I mean, what everybody goes to is, okay, how many jurors do I need in order to exercise peremptory challenges? You need obviously the 12 plus the 3, plus you need however many peremptory strikes on each side, and then obviously a cushion for the amount of cause challenges, because there's a certain amount of people who, even if they clear the initial hurdle of getting through there, there's still going to be additional cause challenges. And cause challenges, for those of you who don't know, are different than peremptory strikes. Every jury selection, there's 2 ways that you are deselecting a jury. You're actually not selecting a jury, you're actually deselecting a jury, which means you are identifying the people that you want to eliminate from the panel because you think they're going to be the highest risk to you and your side. And you can ask the judge to say, based on this juror's answers, either because of the pretrial publicity or because they themselves have been through a terrible divorce and custody hearings, they just can't hear this case. They can't be unbiased and impartial in listening to it. So the judge can then, on their own discretion, excuse those jurors. You need enough jurors, enough cause challenges for that, and then enough peremptory strikes, which each side gets a certain number, in order to then, at their own discretion, say, I'm going to now eliminate a certain number of jurors in order to end up with the jury panel.
And Judy, since you did go to the Georgetown Law Center, the same as John Singer, I'm gonna have to give both of you an IQ test and see who does better. But I'm sure you're both going to perform very well on that. But did it surprise you to see that number of 900? Was it something that you took a second look at?
Oh yeah, definitely. That was a huge number of people, and I did have some comments about that jury consultant that they hired.
Yeah. I want to get into that a little bit, but go.
We'll talk about it later.
You can start us off, and I'll dig into it. What did?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I was kind of turned off by him today. I don't know if you guys saw that towards the end of the day, but he seemed very aggressive and just had this kind of odd demeanor. I felt like Rashbaum should have done it.
Yeah. So Judy here is talking about a guy named Josh Dubin, who's very well known. I can see Richard shaking his head in acknowledgement. I'm going to circle back to that, but I'm glad Judy did bring it up. He is a New Yorker. I'm from outside New York City. So I know that us New Yorkers and New Jerseyans can be obnoxious, and some people did perceive him as being such. I even had a tweet that I pulled out. But I want to get to this quote here from, so this is Tim Jansen being interviewed by the Tallahassee Democrat today, Richard, regarding jury selection. And he says, this jury selection is tricky because jurors will lie or mask their true feelings because they want to be on this jury. Jurors want to be part of a high-profile case for many reasons, including book rights, TV interviews, or other personal motives. You don't normally win a case at jury selection, but you can certainly lose a case if you're not prepared or careful in the selection process. Do you care to comment on this?
Well, he's right. I mean, jury deselection is one of the most important elements there. High-profile trials really do have their own special set of difficulties and challenges. There are people who clearly want to get on there. They've got an agenda. They either want to convict or they want to acquit. They sometimes do it for the celebrity. But also they're intimidated. There's a lot of jurors who want to be fair, but are actually loaded up with a lot of information about the case. They're in a high pressure situation. They're being asked these, sometimes what I think is ridiculous questions, which is, can you be fair and impartial despite everything you've heard about the case, despite everything you may have even given an opinion on? And sometimes they do slip through. So there's a number of sort of gray area agendas that I think you're also looking for. And if you're not careful, especially on the prosecution side, one important point to remember is that the prosecution needs a unanimous verdict here. They need everybody. So defense oftentimes, and I've done this too, which is sometimes you're not looking for an acquittal jury. You're not looking for an unanimous group. You're looking for a couple of jurors that are going to hang a jury, or are going to at least drive a wedge between and create reasonable doubt there. And so sometimes there's a different thing that you're looking for in terms of personality and the sort of the match, the personality blend that you're looking for on the jury panel as you're selecting.
And Richard, I'm taking notes about some of the things you're saying, but one of the things that I am curious about is always how people end up doing what they do. Back in 1986, when you started this, it's an interesting niche profession. How'd you fall into this? How come you didn't become an attorney or a prosecutor, and how come you went into jury consulting?
Well, I'm a stubborn person. My mother's a judge and my dad's a psychologist, and I didn't want to go in either of those professions, clearly. So I decided to carve a path right between them and kind of absorb a little bit of both there. And so as I got into it, I actually was doing a lot of communication skills because that's what my undergraduate degree was in. And I was doing communication skills, and I sometimes were doing classes where attorneys would show up and they would say, hey, I have a case, and can you help me with a witness, or can you help me think about, how do you do this? And having some legal background, because I went to court and watched my mom's trials all the time, I would help them. And so push comes to shove, I learned a lot about sort of the social science, because there's a lot of jury research out there right now about how jurors actually make decisions in cases. And one thing led to another. I fell into some of these high profile cases. And here I am 38 years later.
38 years later, I'm sure doing well, enjoying his career. Kudos to you for that. Kathy Glassford says, fancy fiction is here. Fancy fiction. We've all been following you. You're the insider, as I like to say. Fox Sports has Jay Glazer, the football insider. You're the Dan Markel, Charlie Adelson family insider. What's it like for you to have the first Adelson, on trial now? What's it like for you?
I don't know. I've got mixed feelings about it, because I think that his family members should be sitting beside him in that courtroom, not behind him for support, which they're not doing. Which, how does that look to a jury? I'd be interested on the thoughts of people on this panel, that his family fingers are going to be pointed at his family. Circumstantial evidence and motive are going to be brought up that lay to bear that the only people that wanted Dan Markel dead, that had the motive, and all the circumstantial evidence, the wealth of evidence, point to his family, but yet he's the only family member sitting there being held accountable, and his family members are not there in the courtroom to support him. So it's bittersweet, because I know it's a stepping stone to what Georgia Kappelman has repeatedly said after every interview, and after Ruth Markel has said after every interview, is that they won't stop until everybody who was responsible for this murder are held accountable. And so I'm like that Charlie's being held accountable. I really don't like seeing the gaggle of lawyers that he's got surrounded by him. I don't think that really necessarily will be playing well. This is just a human. This is just someone who's knows the fabric of Tallahassee, has lived there. I've also lived in New York. I've lived in Los Angeles. So I know the big city demographic versus the small town demographic, specifically this one. So I just don't really, it makes me nervous that he's got all this money to throw at his defense, and he only needs to manipulate things or turn things on their side to get one person. And that makes me very nervous. But I also, I don't think it's speaking back to, I guess, Dubin, having lived in New York as long as I did, he reeks New York better than, and I think that happened a bit with the Miami attorneys. They came in, pointing fingers, putting their dukes up, and that's just really not the vibe. It's a laid back Southern town, and I don't know how they're going to react to seeing this wealthy guy with his team of lawyers. While that is a small town feeling, where they've got the prosecutor of Georgia, which is very likable. I just don't know how that's going to play. I don't think the first impression of a normal Tallahassee resident seeing these sort of New York, Northeastern lawyers coming, big city lawyers surrounding this guy, and he's knowing that he's so wealthy and he's gotten away with it for so long. I just don't think it's a good look. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. Wesley John Holmes, lest you think we are not a global show, watching us from downtown Tokyo, previously from Australia, and then you've got New Zealand in Form NZ. So welcome to both of you. Judy, just to pick up on that, first point was Charlie's family's not there. All of Dan's family is there. Does it bother you that they're not sitting there, having to watch this in person? And what about the second part of that? Do you think that it could backfire? Tim Jansen has said that Charlie Adelson should have hired a Tallahassee attorney, possibly even Tim Jansen himself. He says it's a small town. You got to know the inner workings of a small town. Here come these Miami and New York guys, aggressive, possibly intimidating. What do you think of both parts of that?
Yeah, well, I agree, because, first, to the first question, I don't think it really matters. I didn't really care either way if his family were there to support him. I knew they probably wouldn't want to be there because, everybody would be staring, looking at them, they're older. They probably have anxiety problems. So I don't think that it's surprising that the parents aren't there. But yeah, he probably could have saved a lot of money just by having some sort of local attorney, as opposed to hiring this huge team of people coming in from New York City and Miami. So it was just kind of weird seeing that huge team of people.
New Mexico's in the house. So, Richard, sort of an obvious question to you. Let's say you were there, not Josh Dubin, and we'll get back to him in a moment. Let's say you were hired. You're a high-priced jury consultant who's been at it for, as you said, 38 years. What are you looking for when you're picking the jury for the defense in this case? Who are you looking for? Who's your prime juror?
So it's always a tough question because they're really not demographic profiles that you're looking for. In other words, you're really not looking for old or young. You're not looking for educated, non-educated, because those are just indicators. Those are labels. You're looking for attitude and experience. And if I'm on the defense side, I'm looking for a very high burden juror, somebody who is going to really analyze every little piece of evidence. Highly technical people that really don't really like even the concept of circumstantial evidence. They want to see the smoking gun. They want to have, obviously there is some audio recordings. There's some stuff that they have in this case. So there is some of that. But the other thing is they're going to want to see either really high degree of proof here that he is directly tied to this. The other thing I guess I'm looking for is people who say, you've already convicted 3 people, so enough is enough, and people, one of the interesting questions I think on the questionnaire had to do with people who've been through divorces, who've been cut through custody hearings. And I think some of the people who are going to be questioned about their attitudes about these very volatile, because everybody in law knows that one of the most volatile situations is family dissolution and custody hearings. It is where judges become the most violent. As a matter of fact, the judge just got murdered just the other day by a person who he was ruled against in a custody hearing. And so it's people who understand the volatility and also don't understand necessarily that may not lead. Even the instinct to want to put out something, to want to kill somebody, to want to do that, doesn't necessarily mean that it adds up. I think the last profile I'd be looking for on the defense side is just what we call the lone wolf, somebody who's just not going to get along. In other words, I'm looking for a high conflict jury, some people who are not going to necessarily blend with other people personality-wise, or are going to just be what I would call polar responders, people who are going to, somebody says something and they're going to always want to present the other point of view. So looking at those dynamics, that's kind of what I'm looking for on the defense side.
I did not catch this, but this is why I always say best guess, better community. Helen Stewart, what was the strategy from the specialist? I'm assuming this is Dubin here, asking if the jurors like the dentist. Richard, assuming this question was in fact proposed today, what is the strategy behind asking whether or not you like to go to the dentist?
Well, the truth is that jurors bring a whole set of their own personal opinions to it. And sometimes, like, one of the distinctions between Josh Dubin and I is Josh is actually a lawyer, so that's why he's doing the questioning on this. But he's looking for any attitudes that may drive a juror. In other words, what makes them want to find the evidence that will either convict this guy or acquit him. And there's a lot of people who just go, I hate dentists. I just can't stand them. There's something about them, that thinks that they're kind of inherently sadistic. And so I think finding out that he's just looking for people who are just inherently are not going to like the defendant.
Got Donuts. She's been tweeting at me. I've missed her. I haven't seen her in the chat, but she has been following this case closely. Phil Markel, Dan's dad, was in court today because he's a great dad. Harvey was not in court today to support his son because he's a horrible murderous dad. Those are some of the opinions from STS Nation. Lita Randolph, Joel, how many jurors have been summoned for this case? That number, the juror prospective pool was 900. I believe 360 is the number of people that were actually summoned to this case, to answer your question. Fancy fiction. I asked Vinnie Polisham the same question yesterday. I'm going to ask you. Do you think that Charlie thought he'd ever be here in Leon County facing this these potential 12 jurors as his trial is now underway? Do you think he'd ever imagined in his wildest dreams it would come to this?
Hell no.
How come? Why not?
Because if you listen to the wiretap calls and all the stories, and I've heard stories that haven't been out there yet of family dynamics, he has either talked or manipulated his way out of every, troubling situation he's been in. Whether that be, this disability lawsuit that's on pause now. He's got back issues, but there's communication showing that he got back issues while he was like in some massage or brothel in Thailand. You can't make this stuff up. So he's got that disability he's trying to basically get out of working, in my opinion, by this disability. And Judy knows it. She sees it. It's a joke.
It was Vietnam.
It was Vietnam. So he's trying to manipulate the system there. I've heard that all through his life, his strategy was to pull one of his parents, usually Donna, and just talk her ear off until he got his way. So, I mean, you look at he's doing insider trading with his father, clear as day. And he's also, he's obviously asking girls from strip clubs to come over and privately hang out in his pool. He gets away with all of it. I mean, he talks about how his strategy when he's speeding and he doesn't have his license with him, he got pulled over. In order to get out of the ticket, he was wearing scrubs, and said that he was an ER doctor on the way to Broward General. He's bragging about this, not only to his mother, who thinks it's hilarious that he lied to the cops, saying he's an ER doctor and he's on the way to the hospital, and that's how he got out of this ticket and with no ID. He told Katie that. He's bragging to Katie on the wiretaps about, you just got to wear scrubs. You'll never pay a ticket. They have no way to check. I mean, it's just time after time after time, he has found a way to get out of it. And so I just think he thinks that his money, whatever, his own delusions, I think thinks he'll get up on that stand and he'll talk his way out of this. I truly do.
We'll see if that is in fact the case. Jerry Conway, Judy, to you, and then I'm going to get back to Richard. Charlie's shoes were awful, followed by this comment. Wonder if they use stage makeup for Charlie. The point is, Judy, these high-profile defendants are scrutinized to the T, right? I mean, everyone is looking at everything about them. So how important, he does look much different than he had looked with the tan and admittedly on these steroids. How important is it in terms of being presentable in a court of law when you're about to face a jury of your peers?
Yeah, it's very important. So I always tell my clients how they should dress. Usually people are okay with guessing, what you're supposed to wear when you go to court. But I have had clients who, showed up wearing some skimpy teenage girl looking outfit. And I had to tell a client, can you go get something else during lunchtime to wear? I had a client who showed up with this sorry to say, but thuggish looking tank top with a big gold chain, for his deposition. I'm like, okay, well, this is a discrimination case. Why do you want to look like a stereotype at the deposition? So sometimes people do have to really be careful what they look like and what they're wearing. But I'm sure Charlie's team has already thoroughly researched that. So whatever he's wearing, I'm sure they think that's the way to make him look presentable.
Jason Truth. Joel, you never addressed my comment saying you and Vinny look like you could be brothers. What I would do for those blue eyes. If I had Vinny's blue eyes, who knows where I would have ended up. But here I am. Richard, to you, just quickly on that point, where on your lists that you check off is presenting the defendant in an appealing way? How high up is that on your list?
Well, the question really is not necessarily about appealing. It has to do with what do you want? How do you want your defendant to appear? Because jurors are looking at that defendant from the moment they walk into the courtroom, and they're analyzing, does this person look like they are the people that could have done these crimes here? So they're judging the nonverbals. It's not just what they're wearing, it's how they're acting, how they perceive their attitude and their demeanor. And all of that goes into the package. What they're looking for is a certain type of authenticity to understand what it is. So if you want to present him as this sort of hapless guy who doesn't really know what's going on. Yes, he was really upset because his sister was going through this, and he made some crazy comments periodically, but really didn't have anything to do with his plot. Then you want to kind of portray him that way, and you don't want to dress him in the Armanis and have him come on in and super polished, and you don't want to have him looking all cocky and stuff like that. So you're sort of trying to figure out what's the thing. But the one thing to keep in mind always is jurors' BS meter is really high. They're looking for, how is the defendant going to try and sell me on something too? So you have to be really careful that there has to be a vestige of authenticity there, because jurors can look through it and can say, okay, you're selling me. And so you have to be careful that it is consistent with your story that you're going to be presenting in trial.
The psychology of this is fascinating. My father, may he rest in peace, was a psychiatrist. My mother, a licensed therapist. So I find this part of it really interesting. Look at this, Fancy. Meow now, 21. Fancy, would you marry me? You're getting a proposal. Your response, Fancy?
No comment.
No comment. There you go. Very fancy-like to not give a comment on that. How about this from Jason Truth again? Does anyone on the panel want to put percentage-wise how likely it is that Wendy will be further investigated and or charged as an accomplice in this heinous murder? Fancy, back to you on this. So Tim Jansen has been quite vocal, as has John Singer a little bit. John less so, but Tim really does not see an indictment coming, despite the fact that Carl Steinbeck has listed over 100 plus reasons why Wendy Adelson should be indicted as part of a running series we have on STS. Do you think that there is a chance that Wendy, Donna, Harvey follow suit here and end up in Leon County? Fancy.
Oh, sorry, I missed the Fancy. Yes, I do. She, whatever the reason, it's on paper, black and white. She is an unindicted co-conspirator. She is every picture, every sort of org chart the prosecution has ever blasted anywhere has had her picture on it. And if you are watching that trial, even if you were comatose and watching that last trial, it was very clear. Georgia was directly implicating Wendy on several times, questioning her about driving up to the murder, just even getting snarky with her, like just basically saying, her tone was, I know you're lying to me, but let's just get through this as quick as possible so I can get you to introduce what I needed to into evidence. I mean, it was really, she basically insinuated that Wendy was on it several times. So I don't see, and I know Georgia has said many times, I'm going to need something else. I'm going to need another piece of evidence to prosecute any more of the Adelsons. And that at that time she was saying things like that. That was before Charlie was arrested. And the minute that Dulce Vita enhancement was done, I know it was on the eve of Katie's retrial, but that was enhanced. They had Charlie. They took it in front of a grand jury and they charged him. So I just don't think everyone's like, oh, Donna's just going to be charged on the eve. I don't think Georgia would say that and then, do that without getting anything further, as far as we know on Donna. It really took that Dulce Vita to make the Charlie arrest. So it makes me think they are after them. They know they have all the time in the world to prosecute Donna, Wendy, and possibly Harvey. But I do think Donna for sure will be arrested. I don't know what point. And I have in my heart, I believe that Wendy is at the center of all this. And I really hope she gets held accountable. For me, I think she is just disgusting as a lawyer, the way that she repeatedly lied on the stand both times. And I really don't understand how people in her life accept her saying she doesn't watch any media about this case, or that she has never talked to her mother, brother, and father about the murder of the person they all hated as a group. So, I really do hope there are further arrests. And if they're not, this is the only case I've ever looked into as a bystander, reading the docket, learning the criminal justice system as it goes. And it's not lost on me that it's about a murder of a criminal law professor. But I would say what it will teach me if they get away with this is it's just going to be very disheartening about our criminal justice system. I understand it, but it's just like Georgia said, don't let the way they planned it be the way they get away with it. And that's what we've seen so far. And that's what really scares me, that there's just not going to be justice at the end. God forbid Ruth Markel or Phil Markel pass away, and never get it. I just really hope it happens from a human component. But I understand the law is the law. And if you're going to go for somebody, if you're going to take that swing at Wendy or Donna or Harvey, I want them to hit the ball. So I'll wait. But I do think Donna for sure, Wendy 50-50, Harvey, I don't think so. He just was kept. I think he knew all along, but he just didn't move any of the pieces to implicate him. That's my thought.
And my guess is Donna is the most nervous of a wreck of the three that you just mentioned. Becky Ireland, look at this. Just subscribe to Katie Cool Lady. Bonnie Lee Lopez, don't call it a crush, but where is John Singer? He had a last-minute conflict. He will be back with us next week. And we're working on a huge show for Thursday with David Latt, who knows Dan from Harvard Law and is a very prominent legal blogger. And possibly Mark Garagos coming on. Not fully confirmed yet, but that would be Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern time. More of the coverage about the Charlie Adelson trial, of course. Dan Markel at the center of that. Judy, just to piggyback off of Fancy, so you just heard her say that she does think that Donna and Wendy, that the long arm of the law will catch up to them eventually, not Harvey so much. Do you agree with that?
Yes. And actually, just a few days ago, I made this short video just explaining why I don't think Harvey is going to be arrested. So that's just based on what's been made publicly available. So we still don't know what Katie is going to say, what her proffer said, what other evidence the prosecution has. So I hope they all get what they deserve. But it's kind of iffy, especially in terms of Harvey.
What's the Cliff's Notes on Harvey? The 1 or 2 sentence summary of as to why you don't. Yeah,
I can't summarize it in just 1 to 2 sentences. That's why I made a video about it.
All right, well then go to Judy's YouTube channel and check it out. Asian American Legal Focus. Everyone here, by the way, I can see Tim Jansen. Offering up a WRY smile after hearing that you guys think that Wendy and Donna are going down, because I know Tim thinks that the buck stops with Charlie. Time will tell, but it'll be interesting to hear Tim's reaction. So back to jury stuff, because we've got one of the preeminent jury consultants in all the land here. Forget Josh Dubin. We've got Richard Gabriel. So Richard, one interesting point today, I was kind of laughing when I saw this. Tallahassee's mayor, his name is John Daly, and he was among the first group of prospective jurors called this morning, and he was quite quickly dismissed. You see that happen often, where you see the mayor of a town summoned, and then he could be a good juror, couldn't he?
It can happen. The challenge with somebody like that, it does happen. When I recently did a jury selection in Washington, D.C., and you had all kinds of heads of agencies and all kinds of people there. So, and when you're in a big city, like I think hearkening way back to the Winona Ryder shoplifting trial, John Peters was a juror on the case, a producer was on the case. He was sat as a juror. So you get, when you're in big cities, even in smaller cities, everybody's got to answer their jury summons, and you do get that periodically. The challenge for somebody who's like a mayor in terms of impartiality is they're supposed to be impartial, but he also has to think about how will his verdict affect his public perception and his campaign reelection. And so there's all kinds of things that kind of enter into mind. You have to talk to a guy like that to find out a little bit more about what are his concerns about sitting as juror and then rendering a verdict either for guilt or acquittal.
Couple of questions coming in for Richard. The first one from Dorothy Parker. To what extent are Charlie's jury consultants researching potential jurors?
Oh, they're doing all the research. It's very common these days. Once you have the list, you're getting on the social media platforms, you're evaluating this, to really figure out who is this person? Because when jurors come into the courtroom, you get only a very selective amount of information on the jury questionnaire. There's also lots of rules about what you can and can't ask in the actual voir dire process. So you're trying to find out a little bit more, and people are intimidated in a courtroom. They're sometimes not as candid as they might want to be. And so you're trying to find out, you're looking on their Facebook pages to see a little bit about who they are. Have they blogged about something? Have they posted about things one way or the other? And what can that tell you about their personality? So that jury consulting firm is doing a lot of research into the juror backgrounds. There's obviously some rules. You can't friend a juror, you can't follow them, because you have to avoid any even inadvertent contact with a juror, because that could be considered jury tampering. So you have to be super careful how you're doing it. But whatever's public information about that juror, you want to do your research about it.
Kay the Geeky Angel, question for Richard Gabriel. Why are jurors excluded when asked if they or relatives/friends were involved in law enforcement? It's happened to me a couple of times.
Yeah, it's a very common question in any criminal case, because for people who are involved in law enforcement, especially things, they can often, now it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but typically when you're on the defense side, you're going to be really cautious about a juror who's family and friends, because you're going to always favor the investigation that's done by law enforcement and the arrest and the procedure. That's very natural for a person who's involved in law enforcement. So, but they can be highly critical if they feel that somehow law enforcement didn't dot all its I's or cross its T's when they were doing that investigation. So you have to look at that person real carefully. But as a general rule, the defense is looking to exclude people who either themselves are in law enforcement or have family and friends that are involved.
Sonny Tanner was obviously in court. Josh was very pleasant in person. He held the door for me and made eye contact and smiled. Josh Jubin happens to be a frequent guest on the Joe Rogan Experience. I'm coming for you, Joe Rogan. I'm coming to take over your #1 podcast spot in 93 countries. Not stop until I get there. But he's very well spoken, Josh Jubin. That's how I first heard of him. But I can certainly see and understand where people are getting kind of this attitude about him being from New York and being annoyed and aggravated by it. I can certainly see that. There's, dare I say, a little bit of self-righteousness there, and I think people can sometimes read that, and I'm curious if that is happening. Fancy, you are one of the news breakers when it comes to this case, constantly posting new information. What is new that you've reported that you think is relevant to what is happening right now?
That I can share?
Please. Otherwise, you'd have to just think about it.
I'd have to eliminate all of you. I think that, well, I know one thing Katie Cool Lady told me that was interesting, that because of the topic and the audience, the members on this show right now, is that, we're talking a lot about the prominence of this jury consultant Dubin. And Joel, have you ever seen Joe Rogan do stand-up?
I have. I've actually seen him in person, just because I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm a diehard fight fan. Been to a bunch of fights in Vegas. Not a huge fan of Rogan, so I got to be honest. But yeah. I respect what he does. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But I'm neither a huge fan of his stand-up nor a lot of what he says.
Great. I just wanted to get that on record, not for your sake, but I new news. Oh, Katie Cool Lady told me that, despite sort of the slickness and the macho-ness. She maybe is talking about this at a video, but she reported to me that, there were a couple men on the jury pool that were kind of buying into that toughness, she noticed. And she also made the observation, and this is no shade, but it's human behavior. It's fair or unfair. But she said in between Charlie and this Dubin, Rashbaum kind of looked like a weak. It made Rashbaum weakened and somehow like this hardliner, and then he's going to disappear. And I don't know. It's a weird dynamic having these lawyers come in and out with different mojo and impressions on. I mean, these are the first impressions of the jury. So I thought that was interesting that, that maybe there's a little gender component. That tough, New York guy might appeal a little bit more to the men. So that was something she told me, which I thought was an interesting observation. I don't know. It was told to me from a credible source that last week, I don't know if you've reported on this. Supposedly I heard that Catherine Magbanua spent 2 very long days at the Leon County Courthouse. I don't know.
We've heard 12 hours. She was interviewed for 12 hours. Yeah. Again, Tim Jansen sort of shrugged that off. To me, that seems like a substantial amount of time, but what do I know? I'm just a former TV news guy. But you think that's...
I feel that same way, Joel. It's like you get these news, and then these lawyers come in and just kind of like rain on our parades constantly. It's like a theme for me. So Tim said it was a nothing burger.
Pretty much in so many words, but I don't know. I think there's always surprises, so we'll see. Tim's going to make fun of me after the show and put me in my place, but we'll see what happens. This question, I want to go to Judy on this, but look at this. Agent 99, what a great show. Get Smart. Love that show. Will Luis Rivera testify, Judy? There are a bunch of people who are in question. He will. And hang on one sec. McSpunky here. Look at this. This guy's one of the most generous human beings. I was calling him MC Spunky because what do I know? But it's McSpunky. 10 more gifted surviving the Survivor memberships. How come you're so confident that Luis is going to testify?
Sure. Because he was there for the first couple of trials, and this is part of his plea deal. So he got the deal by agreeing to be a state's witness. So he's also been transported from Arizona, I believe, from federal prison. So why would they bring him all the way here if he didn't have to testify? So he's a central character in this case.
And obviously the other big question, and then we'll circle back to Richard, but I'd love to get you and Fancy's take on Katie Magbanua. Of course, there was supposed to be a proffer in the works. That went very quiet. There's a transport order. As far as we know, she's in Leon County. Does Katie take the stand, in your opinion, Judy?
I think so. I mean, all signs point to it, especially when Carl mentioned, was it just yesterday on your show, about Katie spending 2 days in the courtroom talking last week. So why would she do that if she's useless?
Fancy, what do you think? Are we going to see Katie Magbanua, and what is she going to reveal when she's on that stand? I know you have a crystal ball.
Yeah, I have no idea, but I've had one prosecutor tell me, hey, it happens all the time. Just put her up there. She's got good reasons for lying. It happens all the time. And this is someone who knows the details of this case. So they were like, hey, you just put her up there, give a good reason of why she lied, and the juries accept that. And then I hear people from John Singer tells me that he's so scared that the prosecution is going to put her on because they've got a pretty tight case. They have a lot of evidence, and fear to put her on would just give Rashbaum a sideshow to distract and muddy the waters. So I don't know. I really don't. I'm so interested to see, but I understand both those viewpoints, those legal viewpoints, which, I just have a human viewpoint, which is not a legal one and most likely be wrong. So I guess I got to listen to them, but I don't know. Judy, what do you think?
Yeah, we don't know. We're just guessing. So, but my guess is I'm weighing towards yes, she probably is going to testify.
And we will soon find out. I think Hart Matterhorn says it was disgusting how this lawyer made quick mention of the victim, then made this big show to point out poor little Charlie sitting there, sad and lonely, and his daddy's jacket as the real victim. So again, I think optics and presentation in this case incredibly important. And having Daniel Rashbaum, again, I've said this before, by all accounts, is a great guy with a difficult job here. And he's not a typical Miami guy in the sense that he's not pulling into the courthouse in his Ferrari. He's not wearing very flashy suits, kind of a more low-key Miamian, if you will. But again, Tim Jansen thinks it was not the greatest idea to not have a local attorney. We'll see how it plays out. Kendall B. here. Richard, to you, and I think there's another question here. Could the jury be rigged? I think maybe the better question is, can a jury be somewhat manipulated by people who are experts like Josh Dubin? And dare I say maybe manipulate is too strong a word, but you guys are, and I mean this with all due respect, very calculated in how you're picking the jury. If Dubin is great at his job, is he going to find that one guy who is, or one woman, I mean that in a non-gender way, is he going to pick that one person who is going to have some doubt?
Well, let's face it, the role of all advocates to a certain extent is manipulation. So whether it's myself, whether it's Josh Dubin, whether it's the attorneys in the case, they are trying to advocate for a specific outcome. They are trying to orchestrate a different way. As I said before, it's very difficult when you are selecting and to say, I'm going to try and somehow sneak this one juror with an agenda onto the panel in order to get an acquittal in my favor. That's pretty tough. I mean, what you are doing is you're doing your best to try and get a favorable jury. I'm not going to mince words about that. You are trying to get a favorable jury. That being said, the other side is also looking very carefully. Who are those lone wolf jurors? Who are those people who are going to be outliers and are going to try and hang this jury, or somebody with a hidden agenda? That's where the other side, on the prosecution side, because I've done both defense work and I've done prosecution work, and both sides are really trying to say, okay, who can I eliminate that's going to be my highest risk on the panel there that can be a problem here? And with that, if both sides are doing their jobs effectively, you do tend to end up with a jury that's kind of in the middle, that's neutral. If the judge allows you to really talk to jurors, that is sort of how you're doing it. So it's very difficult for you to actually rig a jury in your favor. And this is not the Runaway Jury by John Grisham, where they're all, tailing jurors and trying to intimidate them. That's really not what's happening here. But you are trying to get a favorable jury.
Here's another couple questions for you, Richard. One of Josh Dubin's questions to the jury today was how many had heard of Georgia Kappelman, of course, the lead prosecutor here before the trial. That seems like an obvious question, but and I think the obvious answer is that they wouldn't be tainted by anything that she's done in the past. Is that correct?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, you're always trying to find out who knows everybody in this case. Do they have a favorable or a negative impression of that particular person? Because again, the truth is we talk about this sort of fair and impartial as if a jury comes into this as a blank slate. And that's just not realistic, especially in a high profile trial. Everybody comes loaded in with a lot of information about the trial and sometimes the evidence itself, and comes in with ideas about even the witnesses and the prosecutors and the defense side in the case. That's what you see. You're really trying to find out what people know, what their opinions are, and whether that's going to influence them and how they think about the case.
By the way, someone asked earlier if we're live streaming from Tallahassee, the trial. The answer to that is no, but I'm going to be doing a lot of what we call news live shots, and the COE is working on getting me a stick mic and a tripod so I can get people outside the courthouse, players, and like the fancy fictions of the world, we'll put a mask on her face so no one knows who she is. But we're going to talk to people like Katie Cool Lady and Fancy Fiction in Tallahassee, and those we will stream live. So periodically we'll be going live, and then we'll do the shows at night if I can figure out how to do it, technically speaking. And there's about a 50-50 shot that I can't figure it out, but we'll see. Don't worry, we'll be live somehow. Don Hagerman, back to you, Richard. I believe there's a limit to disqualifying a juror by each side. Can you explain that?
Sure. First of all, there's unlimited challenges for cause. In other words, each side can say, look, I want to make a motion for cause on juror X because they've said they can't be fair, or they said that they have an opinion that he's guilty, or they've heard something about the witnesses in the case. You can make that motion to the judge. A judge can, in his own discretion, say, yes, I'm going to eliminate that person for cause, and that's unlimited. You can do as many of those as you want. And so, but each side, and I'm going to turn to Judy for this, how many strikes does each side have in this case? Has the judge made a determination on that?
It's 13 based on what mentor lawyer said. So I don't practice in Florida, so I think it's 13.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of strikes. So what you're doing in the calculation there, so this is where jury selection becomes a little bit of a game of chess, because you're taking a look at what the whole roster of jurors are in there, and you're looking for where the groups are and how to strategically use your strikes to get to a better group of jurors, or how many strikes you're going to need to get rid of your worst jurors. Because sometimes in a trial, you can't eliminate all your bad jurors. But what you're trying to do is also look for leadership. In other words, who are the people that are not just necessarily, they may have a couple negative responses, but maybe just following whoever the leaders are. Because the truth is, you're actually not selecting a jury of 12. You're selecting a jury of 2 or 3. In other words, who are the opinion leaders that are really going to dominate the discussion and deliberations? That's who you're really concentrating on to try and understand that. So you're using your strikes to try and get to a good group of jurors, to sometimes stop in time. So there's a whole very complicated analysis that goes into how you use those 13 strikes.
By the way, Chelsea Whitaker, did I miss Delphi? You did not. That's at 9 o'clock. The good news is it's at 9. The bad news for these guests is I've got nowhere to go, so I'm going to keep them a little bit longer if they will oblige me. Debbie Lanier here says, Fancy, I'm going to toss this to you. Just because Charlie's parents aren't there for jury selection, do you think there's any chance in hell they show up? Or do you think that Donna is just too afraid of, those handcuffs being slapped on her wrist if she was to walk into the Leon County Courthouse? Is there any chance, in your opinion, that we see them?
No, and I don't think it's because they're somehow scared of being close to the prosecution or feet away from Georgia. They don't want the perp pictures. They don't want pictures all over the Tallahassee Democrat, the Daily Mail. I mean, they don't want the pictures of them sitting in the courtroom when they're clearly implicated. And so I think it's really all about image, and I think they would be there if they could, but I think they don't want to get anywhere near that courtroom because they don't want their picture all over the place. I really do think that it is that simple. Oh, I would like to ask a question before I forget, because I will forget. I tried to remember it 3 times already. I do have a question about sort of the process today that I don't understand as a lay person. Is that sort of after all of going through everything today, and I think they brought up a group of jurors at the end, but at the very end they asked for a change of venue, and I was just curious: is that indicative of the fact that they're not pleased with what they're seeing from the jurors?
So, if you want, I can chime in a little bit.
Yeah, please.
I'm asking you pretty much.
I don't know exactly, but the truth is that the order of proof, in order to change a venue, you have to show that it's going to be difficult for you, if not impossible, for you to seat a fair and impartial jury. And sometimes from the jury questionnaires, you can make a change of venue motion. Sometimes this is just to establish a record, even for appeal, if for some reason he does get convicted. But sometimes what you can do is say, okay, I've made my motion for change of venue. The judge has denied it. We've spoken to X number of jurors, Your Honor. Of those, so many people have said they've heard and seen about this case. We're renewing our motion for change of venue based on what we're hearing and seeing, because a lot of people are saying, yes, I've heard and seen about this case. Yes, I think he's guilty. So therefore, we think it's appropriate to move the venue here. And that's possibly, I don't know exactly why, but that's possibly why they made it today after hearing and seeing from some jurors.
Thank you.
By the way, Becky Ireland joined the 70,000. It's hard to believe this time last year we were about 1,500 subscribers. Today we're at 70,000. So thank you to STS Nation. I always say best guest, better community. Could not have done it without you. But we're just getting started. I just told you I got to catch Joe Rogan, number 1 in 93 countries. I got my work cut out for me. Spotify, hope you're listening. Look at this global show. Ireland is in the house. And Judy, you're about to feel the pressure because you've got one of the preeminent jury consultants, but the question is for you. Look at this. What about Georgia's leadership question? Judy, not Richard, Judy, does the state want leaders or not? What's your response? And let's see if you're right, and we'll have Richard respond.
Sure. If the leader seems to be a very intelligent, thoughtful person who will pay attention to details, why not?
Richard, did she pass the test?
Well, I think Judy's correct in that you want the right leaders here. It's not just necessarily intelligence, because sometimes on the defense side, I'm looking for people who are very intelligent, but sometimes overly analytical, like an engineer or something like that. And sometimes those people can create their own reasonable doubt. So it's a matter of sort of what's the leadership. Sometimes the prosecution, and sometimes the process is both sides are looking for leaders and using their strikes on the high profile leadership people in the jury pool. So you actually don't end up with a group of leaders. Both sides have to look at it that way. One is sometimes the prosecution says, I'm okay with a group of people who are just sort of want to follow along. They may be more deferential to authority. And obviously the prosecution carries a little bit more authority than the defense. And so sometimes the prosecution doesn't mind necessarily a group of people who don't have necessarily a lot of leadership, won't push back as hard on them. That being said, sometimes the defense can want people who are not necessarily as smart or as analytical as that, because they want to propose an alternative conspiracy theory to them, and hopefully a juror will latch onto that too. So it's an interesting question. Both sides, I think, are looking at leadership, and typically it poses a risk. So both sides are going to be trying to get rid of, unless they're absolutely certain that leader is going to be in their camp.
Judy, this is a question that came up yesterday, and I don't think we answered it, from New Britain Pauly. Is it possible to get a last-minute plea deal if Charlie decides to fully cooperate at that last moment?
Yeah,
it is.
I'm pretty sure. I think other attorneys have discussed this also. He can still cut a deal.
Kelly Jansen, the fear of Donna and Harvey running now. Fancy, do you think, because there's been a lot of talk about this among people following the case, that they might just hop over to a little place like Thailand or someone that doesn't have an extradition deal with the United States? Do you think that's reasonable? You think there's any chance Donna and Harvey skip town?
Yes, absolutely. They're cornered. Their freedom's on the line. I think they would have problems leaving the grandchildren. But and when I say grandchildren, I mean Wendy's two boys, because Robert, the older brother, thinks that his family is in all this. And he does that because he knows his family. He knows his family hated Dan with a passion. And he knows that when he went and tried to talk about Dan's murder, not necessarily Dan's murder, I don't think he got a lot of questions. He talked on a podcast about this. But he also, I think it's important to note, is that he said that it's minute that, he wanted to talk about the arrest, and the minute the family shut down. He knows his family. You know your family. If you were to confront your family about a murder of another family member, and they were giving you the vibes, you know your family. And that's when you have to protect your own family, like Robert did and with his children, and moved away. And broke all contact. He's not going to go to Thanksgiving with people he thinks murdered somebody in their family. But so those two grandchildren. But I think Wendy's boys would be the thing that would be most hard for them to leave. And also their pride, because right now they're still saying, we're framed essentially. We've been extorted. So I don't think, I do worry about them hopping in a boat and going to Cuba. And I heard on the wiretaps and posted on my channel that shortly after the arrests of Sigfredo Garcia, Charlie was signing up for a private jet charter where he could sort of skirt, the airlines in the airport and sign up for this charter. I don't think it would necessarily take him to his final destination, but it possibly could get him to skirt the airport. And so, that was, I think, ultimately his lawyer at the time convinced him maybe to stay. But I do think that Harvey and Donna, man, if the heat gets a little more, I think I could see them going out to live the next decade or two of their lives somewhere completely away from all of this. But yeah, I do worry about it.
Okay. A couple more things I want to get to Richard about, but first, Catalina asking, have the Dolce Vita wiretaps been included as evidence? They are admissible. The transcripts are not. The enhanced tape is admissible. A lot of people think that is the death knell for Charlie Adelson. How about this, Judy? And then I'm going to hop back to Richard. Does the panel think Katie Magbanawa can still get a deal? Is that possible?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I don't know for sure the procedure there. I thought that the judge would ultimately have to order any sort of reduction in sentence for her, but I'm not sure if that has to take place before Charlie's trial or before she testifies versus afterwards.
So Richard, a couple things here that I noted. A handful of jurors were excused in the morning for health reasons and other issues. Jurors can be dismissed for a number of reasons, including if they are 70 years of age or older, if they're expecting mothers or expectant mothers, parents of children under 6, or who have performed state jury service in the last year. All these reasons came into play today. Nothing here really earth-shattering. One prospective juror today said that he knew Dan Markel, and the quote was, "To this day, when I drive down Trescott, that's the street, it's hard not to think about him," this man said, and hopefully he didn't suffer. I assume if you're Josh Dubin, immediately you're eliminating that juror. Is that right?
Yes. Anybody who knows anybody close to the case pretty much is going to be gone here. That's sort of a given. That's why they go through these very extensive procedures here. There's a whole, obviously the criteria for hardship, what we call it, is as you listed out, if anybody's of a certain age, anybody who also has an extreme financial hardship. Also, they just can't take this much time off the work and their employer won't pay them. People who are taking care of small kids, people who are taking care of elderly people, medical reasons, all that are good, fine excuses for getting dismissed from jury service. And of course, people who know people who obviously have seen and heard about the case. And obviously a few jurors have said, yeah, I know about this case. I think he's guilty. That's obviously a cause challenge. So there's a number of reasons why. That's why they start out with 900, because some people even just don't even show up. And that's why they have to start with so many. And there's a lot of reasons why people can be excused.
This is an interesting question from Tia Bawa. Can a jury consultant, Richard, who has found disqualifying information about a juror, say on Facebook, decide to hold on to that information so it can be used in appeal in case Charlie or a defendant is convicted? Is that something that people do?
It's a really interesting question. And the truth is that as the attorney, once you have the information, I think if you have something that you think might be disqualifying, I think there is an obligation to actually present that to the court. Typically when you find out something, let's say something online, you would typically want to eliminate that juror knowing that information. So you don't typically ask the juror that in court, but you then talk to the judge and you say, Your Honor, this juror on their questionnaire said X. Online, they've listed this. We think that is probably disqualifying, or they say they haven't heard about the case and they posted online that they have strong opinions about the case. we think they should be dismissed for cause. So typically you don't want to be used on appeal. You want to use it to eliminate that juror right then and there. That being said, there are times where you find out information about jurors during the trial after they've been seated. And then sometimes you can use that information in an appeal. In the event that Charlie gets convicted, you can say, look, we found out afterwards that this juror actually had a lot of opinions about this, or they knew a certain one of the witnesses and they didn't say that on the questionnaire. That kind of conflicting information can be used in appeal to try and overturn a conviction.
So Josh Dubin, we talked about him earlier. I pulled a tweet. I promised I would read it. This is from an STS Nation member, Parisa Maradi, who tweeted this at me. And Richard, she said, big mistake for Charlie Adelson's defense team to have Josh Dubin in his box. He looks very aggressive, unwelcoming, unfriendly, arrogant, and pompous, kind of like his client. What do you think? Is it a mistake?
Well, first impressions matter. And because in jury selection, the first priority is how can you improve the quality of information that you're getting from jurors so that you can make those cause challenges and peremptory strikes? That's number one. Number two is you are building a relationship with jurors here. So there is something, and the thing that's crazy is that sometimes as you've discussed already, some people are really receptive to that. They want that aggressive defense kind of thing, and they admire it. They expect a defense team to be aggressive. So sometimes Josh may fit in their view what they would expect in a defense attorney. They don't necessarily discount him for it. That being said, he's right. I mean, if you're going to grate on it, and this is why sometimes I think it is a good idea to have local counsel. If you know the people, have a sense of the people are there. Look, when I was doing the Phil Spector case, one of our lead attorneys was Bruce Cutler, who was John Gotti's lawyer. And he was a typical New Yorker, and he came into town, and his style was very different than Los Angeles style there. And I could see the jurors trying to figure out whether they liked him or not. So it's something to consider. It's not the be all or the end all, but it is something that you really can think about because you are building a relationship with that jury, with jury selection.
By the way, I once interviewed for a job as a correspondent in LA, and I was working in New York, and I wore a pinstripe suit, and they said to me, "You look a little too much like a financial guy," and I screwed myself. I should have worn, I don't know, I should have had tat sleeves and like an unbuttoned shirt for LA, but I went the wrong way.
Yeah.
Two quick things, and then we're going to wrap it up and get final thoughts from everybody. So Got Donuts tweeted at me, Joel, did you notice today, this is for you, Richard, again, how the great Georgia Kappelman, and by the way, she's a bit of a cult of personality. Everyone seems to love Georgia and her no-nonsense style. That's not the tweet. The tweet is, did you notice today how the great Georgia asked the jury if the person driving the getaway car in the commission of a crime is as guilty of the person they drove to commit a robbery where a murdering of a store clerk also happened. Then the defense immediately asked for a sidebar. The obvious implication here, Richard, is she's, teeing up the fact that if you're an accomplice, you're just as guilty, right?
Yeah. So I talked about, getting good quality information, building rapport. The third leg of the stool, as it were, in this is attorneys do plant themes during voir dire as well. And that is clearly her saying to the jury, hey, I want you to do it. If you really want to find out, I would have phrased the question a little bit differently if I were on the prosecution side, which is to find out from people who don't think the person who drives the getaway car is as guilty, because those are people that you want to identify and get rid of, because you think, no, they may not be as in on it as possible. But she's planting a theme. This guy's as guilty as the people who committed the crime. And I understand that's what attorneys do sometimes in their voir dire.
Yeah. And one final thing here with respect to Georgia, she asked that the Judge Stephen Everett, include today mention of burden of proof presumption of innocence and the right to remain silent in his instructions to possible jury members. What's that about?
Again, to me?
Yeah, to you, Richard.
Well, it's obviously it's important for jurors. Jurors don't really understand what the burden of proof is. They've watched a lot of Law and Order. They've heard Beyond a Reasonable Doubt a lot. But the truth is that they don't really understand that. And when I've been on the defense side in some of these cases, actually jurors think the burden of proof is on the defendant. So it's a little counterintuitive for some jurors to believe that somehow, because they think, well, okay, you've been accused of this terrible thing. Go ahead and tell me why you didn't do it. So the judge has to somehow step in and go, here's what it really is. Here's why the burden of proof is on the prosecution. It's a high burden of proof. And also, right not to testify, Fifth Amendment rights. A lot of jurors do think, hey, if you're accused of doing something terrible, why wouldn't you get on the stand and defend yourself? And so to instruct them about that helps to reorient a lot of jurors who may not understand some of these basic principles.
Well, we are covering the Charlie Adelson trial, gavel to gavel, as they say. Tomorrow, by the way, tonight, just so you remember, and I don't know how I'm going to do it, 35 minutes from now, we're going to be doing the Delphi murder case. And then tomorrow, 7 p.m., we're back to Caitlin Armstrong, the love triangle out of Austin, Texas. And we'll be back on this on Thursday. The person who's all over this from the beginning, Judy Tsang, the founder and owner of the Wake Law Office, born in Chicago, raised in Georgia. She went to the University of California at Berkeley, no small feat there, and then topped it with the Georgetown University Law Center. And she hosts Asian American Legal Focus on YouTube. I had a question that the COE just removed for you, Judy. So, Judy, how dare you, COE? Judy, your final thoughts. What are you... What's your biggest anticipation, I should say? That was not the question. But what's your biggest sort of anticipation right now? What are you looking forward to the most?
I'm looking forward to seeing if Katie testifies, because that's a big question mark, which, reasonable people have been differing on. So we'll see.
And if she does testify, how early on do you think she would?
Let me guess, because based on the previous trials, they did a lot of, background foundation, law enforcement, the neighbor who found Dan, the medical examiners. So I'm just guessing if she does testify, it might be towards the end, maybe, of the prosecutor's presentation. Just a guess.
Everyone hold Judy to that. The end of the state's case. There you go. There she is, behind her avatar, the mysterious Fancy Fiction, who maybe I will have the pleasure of meeting if she's in a full mask, full facial mask. She remains anonymous, hosting a YouTube channel with the same name, Fancy Fiction, where she has painstakingly posted important videos highlighting pertinent wiretaps related to the players, some implicated, others not, in the Dan Markel case. Does the troll on Fancy's shoulder have a name, Fancy? That is a question.
Charlie's Nightmare.
Fancy, this is not the right wording, but my mind is mush. But what are you sort of most looking forward to? I don't think anyone's looking forward to any of this because of the heinous nature. And by the way, I think what Katie Kool-Lady was saying, that comment that I brought up, which I was going to ask Judy, which I will now ask you, was that the defense had a theme of this. Oh, this happened so long ago. That'd be kind of a weird defense strategy, I think. But again, what do I know? But what are you anticipating the most?
Well, just to go on that, it happened so long ago. Well, then let's just stop all the rape kits. Let's just keep the rape kits. Let's just burn them all away. Too long ago, not worth chasing, which is ridiculous.
Fancy, you should have been an attorney. How come you didn't become an attorney, Fancy?
You know what? I've worked in corporate and, in management. So I had the opportunity to interview a lot of people. And I saw so many resumes with a law degree on it. And as an interviewer, and so the hiring committee, I would ask, you have a law degree. I've asked this so many times. You have a law degree. What's just so many people said they didn't use it or weren't interested. And one of my really good friends was a lawyer. She actually passed the California bar, and now she's basically, it's like an Instagram model. So it just, I don't know. I feel like also too, being a lawyer constrains you so much because you have to always worry about what you say and like protecting that bar card. And that just would not work for my personality, frankly. I would die inside.
Well, I think both you and the COE would have been excellent attorneys. And if the COE was an attorney, I wouldn't be doing 2 shows tonight. I'll only be doing 1 show. So there you go. Huge thanks goes out to Richard Gabriel, who spent a lot more time than I think he thought he would, and I hope he will come back. Since 1985, Richard Gabriel has been a leader in the field of jury research. And one might say he is the preeminent jury consultant in all the land. Forget Josh Dubin. He's got nothing on Richard Gabriel, who's been involved in more than 1,500 trials. Here are some of the names of those cases: Aaron Hernandez, Casey Anthony, O.J. Simpson, Phil Spector, Enron, remember that company? Whitewater, Kwame Kilpatrick, Heidi Fleiss. That's an interesting and fun one. The list goes on. He's also the author of Acquittal. So check out that book. Richard, this question and your final thoughts. Any good ideas of when opening statements? I always was taught this: opening statements, closing arguments, opening statements, closing arguments. When will they take place? People in Tallahassee say 2-3 days and they're on to opening statements. Do you see that happening?
I do, especially if he has 40 qualified and then another 14 or something from today. If his magic number is I'm going to need about 60, 70 jurors total in my pool, he's already got a certain number. He's getting there. So if he feels like he's got enough to both deal with cause challenges, because he's already dealt with some of that from the questionnaire and some of the individual questioning, it can be another day or 2 before we're on to opening statements. So I think that's going to be pretty quick. The one of the things I do want to say, though, is I've been involved, obviously, in a lot of some of these bigger trials. The jury, I always am a big fan of the jury system because jurors really do take their job seriously. And we sit at home, we second guess them sometimes, but they are really trying to give that defendant the presumption of innocence. They try to give the burden of proof to the prosecution. They take their jobs very seriously. And sometimes the evidence that they see in trial is different than they've seen on the media. And the rules that they have to make decisions by are different. So I do like to say that in these high profile trials, despite all of things that we may believe on the outside, always give respect to the jury because they are doing a very, very difficult job.
And look at how polite this is. Fancy Fiction, that cute little baby photo there. She wants to ask another question. Fancy, the floor is yours.
Yes, I would just like to ask our expert here on the panel. You said you've worked with Phil Spector, or you had worked with him, and I just would like to ask: have you seen the mugshot for Charles Adelson?
I don't know if I have seen the mugshot for him.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of similarities with the hair, and I was just wondering if you made that connection as well.
Well,
Richard, I'm going to send it to you, but go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, mugshots are never. You can't win with a mugshot, and the hair is always terrible. And you can do the Donald Trump defiant mugshot. You can do the smiling mugshot, which always seems completely inappropriate. There's an amazing thing that you always take a look at, and so I am interested to see what the mugshot is because, sometimes you have to ask that question in jury selection. Have you seen the mugshots? What do you think? Because people in the Phil Spector case just reacted to the way he looked. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you just go, boy, same thing whenever you're doing a gang case, you just look over and you go, he just looks like he did it. Mm-hmm. So those impressions do matter.
Yeah, thank you. When his mugshots were released, it was one of the best days of my life. So, Joel, if you could send him the one in the orange sweatshirt, What's the second one? Thank you.
I'm gonna connect you all, Fancy, and then maybe I'll have you use it so I don't screw that up. But Phil Spector reminds me of just something that's on my mind. Richard Gabriel, 38 years, one profession, became elite at what he does. The COE, who I love to death. She's the backbone of our family. She's had 38 jobs in about a year's time. And one of those jobs, ironically, was working for Dateline on the Phil Spector case. So we have come full circle. The COE is hardworking for days or weeks at a time. And then I've got to re-energize her. So just couldn't let that slide. Go Georgia. This was a great episode. Richard Gabriel restores such confidence in often scary legal system. Any final rebuttal there, COE, to that comment? I'm waiting for it. Who is Joe Rogan? I love this comment. Quick reminder, once again, in 25 minutes, I'm back for the Delphi murders. I agree. I sat in that trial every day. Everyone would talk about how Phil looked crazy in that trial. I think it was 2007. He had what we call a Jew-fro, an afro on a Jewish person, otherwise known as a Jew-fro, and it did not play to his base. There you go. Back at 9 o'clock tomorrow. 7 p.m. It said 5 p.m. originally. Caitlin Armstrong, the Love Triangle out of Austin, Texas. Carm is here for that, as is Darby Fox. And we've got a new guest who's a former prosecutor out of Tennessee to walk us through that. And then Thursday, we're back with more on the Charlie Adelson trial. Until then, love you, America. Love you, Los Angeles. Love you, North Carolina. Love you, wherever Fancy is. Love you, Tallahassee, Florida, Tasmania, the Republic of Ireland, Israel, everyone near and far in between. Stand by, guys.